Tantor Audio presents A Shadow in Summer by Daniel Abraham, narrated by Shah. Prologue. Otah took the blow on the ear, the flesh opening under the rod. Tahi the teacher, pulled the thin lacquered wood through the air with a fluttering sound like bird wings. Otah's discipline held. He did not shift or cry out. Tears welled in his eyes, but his hands remained in a pose of greeting.
"Again!"
Tahi barked.
"Incorrectly!"
"We are honored by your presence, most high, Dai Quo," Otah said sweetly, as if it were the first time he had attempted the ritual phrase. The old man sitting before the fire considered him closely, then adopted a pose of acceptance. Tahi made a sound of satisfaction in the depths of his throat. Otah bowed, holding still for 3 breaths and hoping that Tahi wouldn't strike him for trembling. The moment stretched, and Otah nearly let his eyes stray to his teacher. It was the old man with his ruined whisper who at last spoke the words that ended the ritual and released him.
"Go, disowned child, and attend to your studies."
Otah turned and walked humbly out of the room. Once he had pulled the thick wooden door closed behind him and walked down the chill hallway toward the common rooms, he gave himself permission to touch his new wound. The other boys were quiet as he passed through the stone halls of the school, but several times their gazes held him and his new shame. Only the older boys in the black robes of Milakwo's disciples laughed at him. Otah took himself to the quarters where all the boys in his cohort slept. He removed the ceremonial gown, careful not to touch it with blood, and washed the wound in cold water. The stinging cream for cuts and scrapes was in an earthenware jar beside the water basin. He took 2 fingers and slathered the vinegar-smelling ointment onto the open flesh of his ear. Then, not for the first time since he had come to the school, he sat on his spare, hard bunk and wept.
"This boy,"
the Dai said, as he took up the porcelain bowl of tea. Its heat was almost uncomfortable.
"He holds some promise."
"Some," Tahi allowed, as he leaned the lacquered rod against the wall and took the seat beside his master.
"He seems familiar."
"Otah Machi, 6th son of the Kai Machi."
"I recall his brothers, also boys of some promise. What became of them?"
"They spent their years, took the brand, and were turned out. Most are. We have 300 in the school now, and 40 in the black, under Milakwo's care. Sons of the Kayem, or the ambitious families of the Kayem."
"So many. I see so few."
Tahi took a pose of agreement, the cant of his wrists giving it a nuance that might have been sorrow or apology.
"Not many are both strong enough and wise, and the stakes are high."
The Dai sipped his tea and considered the fire.
"I wonder,"
the old man said,
"how many realize we are teaching them nothing?"
"We teach them all. Letters, numbers, any of them could take a trade after they leave the school."
"But nothing of use, nothing of poetry, nothing of the andat."
"If they realize that, Most High, they're halfway to your door. And for the ones we turn away, it's better, Most High."
"Is it?"
Tahi shrugged and looked into the fire. He looked older, the Dai thought, especially about the eyes. But he had met Tahi as a rude youth many years before. The age he saw there now, and the cruelty, were seeds he himself had cultivated.
"When they have failed, they take the brand and make their own fates,"
Tahi said.
We take away their only hope of rejoining their families, of taking a place at the courts of the Kayem. They have no family. They cannot control the andat,
the Dai Quo said.
We throw these boys away, much as their fathers have. What becomes of them, I wonder?
"Much the same as becomes of anyone, I imagine. The ones from low families of the Utkayem are hardly worse off than when they came. The sons of the Kayem, once they take the brand, they cannot inherit, and it saves them from being killed for their blood rights. That alone is a gift in its way."
It was true. Every generation saw the blood of the Kayem spilled. It was the way of the Empire. And in times when all three of the Kai's acknowledged sons slaughtered one another, the high families of the Utkayem unsheathed their knives, and cities were caught for a time in fits of violence from which the poets held themselves apart like priests at a dogfight. These boys in the school's care were exempt from those wars, at only the price of everything they had known in their short lives. And yet,
disgrace is a thin gift,
the Dai Quo said. Tahi, his old student who had once been a boy like these, sighed.
"It's what we can offer."
The Dai Quo left in the morning just after dawn, stepping through the great bronze doors that opened only for him. Otah stood in the ranks of his cohort, still holding a pose of farewell. Behind him, someone took the chance of scratching. Otah could hear the shifting sound of fingers against cloth. He didn't look back. Two of the oldest of Mila Quo's black robes pulled the great doors closed. In the dim winter light that filtered through high-set, thin windows, Otah could see the bustle of the black robes taking charge of the cohorts. The day's tasks varied. The morning might be spent working in the school, repairing walls, or washing laundry, or scraping ice from the garden walkways that no one seemed to travel besides the boys set to tend them. The evening would be spent in study. Numbers, letters, religion, history of the old empire, the Second Empire, the war, the cities of the Kayem. And more often these last weeks, one of the two teachers would stand at the back of the room while one of the black robes lectured and questioned. Mila Quo would sometimes interrupt and tell jokes, or take the lecture himself, discussing things the black robes never spoke of. Tahi Quo would only observe and punish. All of Otah's cohort bore the marks of the lacquered stick. Riith Quo, one of the oldest of the black robes, led Otah and his cohort to the cellars. For hours as the sun rose unseen, Otah swept dust from stones that seemed still cold from the last winter, and then washed them with water and rags until his knuckles were raw. Then Riith Quo called them to order, considered them, slapped one boy whose stance was not to his standards, and marched them to the dining hall. Otah looked neither forward nor back, but focused on the shoulders of the boy ahead of him. The midday meal was cold meat, yesterday's bread, and a thin barley soup that Otah treasured because it was warm. Too soon Riith called them to wash their bowls and knives and follow him. Otah found himself at the front of the line, an unenviable place, and so was the first to step into the cold listening room with its stone benches and thin windows that had never known glass. Tahi Quo was waiting there for them. None of them knew why the round-faced, scowling teacher had taken an interest in the cohort, though speculations were whispered in the dark of their barracks. The Daikwo had chosen one of them to go and study the secrets of the andat, to become one of the poets, gain power even higher than the Kayem, and skip over the black robes of Milakwo entirely. Or one of their families had repented sending their child, however minor in the line of succession, to the school, and was in negotiation to forego the branding and take their disowned son back into the fold. Otah had listened, but believed none of the stories. They were the fantasies of the frightened and the weak, and he knew that if he clung to one, it would shatter him. Dwelling in the misery of the school and hoping for nothing beyond survival was the only way to keep his soul from flying apart. He would endure his term and be turned out into the world. This was his 3rd year at the school. He was 12 now, and near the halfway point of his time. And today was another evil to be borne as the day before and the day ahead. To think too far in the past or the future was dangerous. Only when he let his dreams loose did he think of learning the secrets of the andat, and that happened so rarely as to call itself never. Rietkwo, his eyes on the teacher at the back as much as on the students, began to declaim the parable of the twin dragons of chaos. It was a story Otah knew, and he found his mind wandering. Through the stone arch of the window, Otah could see a crow hunched on a high branch. It reminded him of something he could not quite recall.
"Which of the gods tames the spirits of water?"
Rietkwo snapped. Otah pulled himself back to awareness and straightened his spine. Rietkwo pointed to a thick-set boy across the room.
"Oladak the Wanderer,"
the boy said, taking a pose of gratitude to one's teacher.
"And why were the spirits who stood by and neither fought with the gods nor against them consigned to a lower hell than the servants of chaos?"
Again Rietkwo pointed.
"Because they should have fought alongside the gods,"
the boy shouted. It was a wrong answer. Because they were cowards, Otah thought, and knew he was correct. Tahi's lacquered rod whirred and struck the boy hard on the shoulder. Rietkwo smirked and returned to his story. After the class, there was another brief work detail for which Tahikwo did not join them. Then the evening meal, and then the end of another day. Otah was grateful to crawl into his bunk and pull the thin blanket up to his neck. In the winter, many of the boys slept in their robes against the cold, and Otah was among that number. Despite all this, he preferred the winter. During the warmer times, he would still wake some mornings having forgotten where he was, expecting to see the walls of his father's home, hear the voices of his older brothers, Biitra, Danat, and Cain. Perhaps see his mother's smile. The rush of memory was worse than any blow of Tahikwo's rod, and he bent his will toward erasing the memories he had of his family. He was not loved or wanted in his home, and he understood that thinking too much about this truth would kill him. As he drifted toward sleep, Rietkwo's harsh voice murmuring the lesson of the spirits who refused to fight spun through his mind. They were cowards, consigned to the deepest and coldest hell. When the question came, his eyes flew open. He sat up. The other boys were all in their cots. One, not far from him, was crying in his sleep. It was not an unusual sound. The words still burned in Otah's mind, the coward spirits consigned to hell.
"And what keeps them there?"
his quiet inner voice asked him.
"Why do they remain in hell?"
He lay awake for hours, his mind racing. The teacher's quarters opened on a common room. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books and scrolls. A fire pit glowed with coals prepared for them by the most honored of Milakwo's black-robed boys. The wide gap of a window, glazed double to hold out the cold of winter, the heat of the summer, looked out over the roadway leading south to the high road. Tahi sat now, warming his feet at the fire and staring out into the cold plain beyond. Mila opened the door behind him and strode in.
"I expected you earlier,"
Tahi said. Mila briefly took a pose of apology.
Narrator was complaining about the kitchen flue smoking again, he said.
Tahi grunted.
"Sit. The fire's warm."
Fires often are,
Mila agreed, his tone dry and mocking. Tahi managed a thin smile as his companion took a seat.
"What did he make of your boys?"
Tahi asked.
Much the same as last year. They have seen through the veil and now lead their brothers toward knowledge,
Mila said. His hands were in a pose of gentle mockery.
They are petty tyrants to a man. Any andat strong enough to be worth holding would eat them before their hearts beat twice.
"Pity."
Hardly a surprise. And yours?
Tahi chewed for a moment at his lowered lip and leaned forward. He could feel Mila's gaze on him.
"Otah Machi disgraced himself,"
Tahi said.
"but he accepted the punishment well. The Dai Quo thinks he may have promise."
Mila shifted. When Tahi looked over, the teacher had taken a pose of query. Tahi considered the implicit question, then nodded.
"There have been some other signs,"
Tahi said.
"I think you should put a watch over him. I hate to lose him to you, in a way."
You like him.
Tahi took a pose of acknowledgment that held the nuance of a confession of failure.
"I may be cruel, old friend,"
Tahi said, dropping into the familiar.
"but you're heartless."
The fair-haired teacher laughed, and Tahi couldn't help but join him. They sat silent then for a while, each in his own thoughts. Mila rose, shrugged off his thick woolen top-robe. Beneath it he still wore the formal silks from his audience yesterday with the Dai Quo. Tahi poured them both bowls of rice wine.
It was good to see him again,
Mila said some time later. There was a melancholy note in his voice. Tahi took a pose of agreement, then sipped his wine.
"He looked so old,"
Tahi said. Otah's plan, such as it was, took little preparation, and yet nearly 3 weeks passed between the moment he understood the parable of the spirits who stood aside and the night when he took action. That night, he waited until the others were asleep before he pushed off the thin blankets, put on every robe and legging he had, gathered his few things, and left his cohort for the last time. The stone hallways were unlit, but he knew his way well enough that he had no need for light. He made his way to the kitchen. The pantry was unlocked. No one would steal food for fear of being found out and beaten. Otah scooped double handfuls of hard rolls and dried fruit into his satchel. There was no need for water. Snow still covered the ground, and Tahi Quo had shown them how to melt snow with the heat of their own bodies, walking without the cold penetrating to their hearts. Once he was provisioned, his path led him to the great hall. Moonlight from the high windows showing ghost-dim the great aisle where he had held a pose of obeisance every morning for the last 3 years. The doors, of course, were barred, and while he was strong enough to open them, the sounds might have woken someone. He took a pair of wide, netted snowshoes from the closet beside the great doors, and went up the stairs to the listening room. There, the thin windows looked out on a world locked in winter. Otah's breath plumed already in the chill. He threw the snowshoes and satchel out the window to the snow-cushioned ground below, then squeezed through and lowered himself from the outer stone sill until he hung by his fingertips. The fall was not so far. He dusted the snow from his leggings, tied the snowshoes to his feet by their thick leather thongs, took up the bulging satchel, and started off, walking south toward the high road. The moon, near the top of its nightly arc, had moved the width of 2 thick-gloved hands toward the western horizon before Otah knew he was not alone. The footsteps that had kept perfect time with his own fell out of their pattern, as intentional a provocation as clearing a throat. Otah froze, then turned.
"Good evening, Otamachi,"
Mila Quo said, his tone casual.
"A good night for a walk, huh? Cold, though."
Otah did not speak, and Mila Quo strode forward, his hand on his own satchel, his footsteps nearly silent. His breath was thick and white as a goose feather.
"Yes," the teacher said, "cold and far from your bed."
Otah took a pose of acknowledgment appropriate for a student to a teacher. It had no nuance of apology, and Otah hoped that Mila Quo would not see his trembling, or if he did, would ascribe it to the cold.
"Leaving before your term is complete, boy? You disgrace yourself."
Otah switched to a pose of thanks appropriate to the end of a lesson, but Mila Quo waved the formality aside and sat in the snow, considering him with an interest that Otah found unnerving.
"Why do it?"
Mila Quo asked.
"There's still hope of redeeming yourself. You might still be found worthy, so why run away? Are you so much a coward?"
Otah found his voice.
"It would be cowardice that kept me, Mila Quo." "How so?"
The teacher's voice held nothing of judgment or testing. It was like a friend asking a question because he truly did not know the answer.
"There are no locks on hell,"
Otah said. It was the first time he had tried to express this to someone else, and it proved harder than he had expected.
"If there aren't locks, then what can hold anyone there besides fear that leaving might be worse?" "And you think the school is a kind of hell?"
It was not a question, so Otah did not answer.
"If you keep to this path, you'll be the lowest of the low,"
Mila said.
"A disgraced child without friend or ally, and without the brand to protect you. Your brothers may well track you down and kill you."
"Yes."
"Do you have some place to go?"
"The high road leads to Patai and Nantani."
"Where you know no one."
Otah took a pose of agreement.
"This doesn't frighten you?"
the teacher asked.
"It is the decision I've made."
He could see the amusement in Mila Quo's face at his answer.
"Fair enough, but I think there's an alternative you haven't considered."
The teacher reached into his satchel and pulled out a small cloth bundle. He hefted it for a moment, considering, and dropped it on the snow between them. It was a black robe. Otah took a pose of intellectual inquiry. It was a failure of vocabulary, but Mila Quo took his meaning.
"Andat are powerful, Otah, like small gods, and they don't love being held to a single form. They fight it, and since the forms they have are a reflection of the poets who bind them, the world is full of willing victims, people who embrace the cruelty meted out against them. An andat formed from a mind like that would destroy the poet who bound it and escape. That you have chosen action is what the black robes mean."
"Then, the others, they all left the school too?" Mila laughed. Even in the cold, it was a warm sound.
"No, No, you've all taken different paths. Ansha tried to wrestle Dahikwo's stick away from him. Ranit Kiru asked forbidden questions, took the punishment for them, and asked again until Tahi beat him asleep. He was too sore to wear any robe at all for weeks, but his bruises were black enough. But you've each done something. If you choose to take up the robe, that is, leave it, and really, this is just a conversation. Interesting, maybe, but trivial.
And if I take it?
You will never be turned out of the school so long as you wear the black. You will help to teach the normal boys the lesson you've learned, to stand by your own strength.
Otah blinked, and some emotion he couldn't put a name to, bloomed in his breast. His flight from the school took on a new meaning. It was a badge of his strength, the proof of his courage.
And the andat? And the andat,
Mila Kwo said.
You'll begin to learn of them in earnest. The Dai Kwo has never taken a student who wasn't first a black robe at the school.
Otah stooped, his fingers numb with cold, and picked up the robe. He met Mila Kwo's amused eyes and couldn't keep from grinning. Mila Kwo laughed, stood, and put an arm around Otah's shoulder. It was the first kind act Otah could remember since he had come to the school.
Come on, then. If we start now, we may get back to the school by breakfast.
Otah took a pose of enthusiastic agreement.
And while this once I think we can forgive it, don't make a habit of stealing from the kitchen. It upsets the cooks.
The letter came some weeks later, and Mila was the first to read it. Sitting in an upper room, his students abandoned for the moment, he read the careful script again and felt his face grow tight. When he had gone over it enough to know he could not have misunderstood, he tucked the folded paper into the sleeve of his robe and looked out the window. Winter was ending, and somehow the eternal renewal that was spring felt like an irony. He heard Tahi enter, recognizing his old friend's footsteps.
"There was a courier,"
Tahi said.
"Ansha said there was a courier from the Dai Kwo."
Mila looked over his shoulder. His own feelings were echoed in Tahi's round face.
From his attendant, actually.
"The Dai Kwo? Is he—"
No,
Mila said, fishing out the letter.
Not dead. Only dying.
Tahi took the proffered pages, but didn't look at them.
"Of what?"
Time.
Tahi read the written words silently, then leaned against the wall with a sharp sigh.
It isn't so bad as it could be,"
Tahi said.
No, not yet. He will see the school again, twice, perhaps.
"He shouldn't come,"
Tahi snapped.
"The visits are a formality. We know well enough which boys are ready. We can send them. He doesn't have to—"
Mila turned, interrupting him with a subtle pose that was a request for clarification and a mourning, both. Tahi laughed bitterly and looked down.
"You're right,"
he said.
"Still, I'd like the world better if we could carry a little of his weight for him, even if it was only a short way."
Mila started to take a pose, but hesitated, stopped, only nodded.
Otah Machi?
Tahi asked.
"Maybe. We might have to call him for Otah. Not yet, though. The robes have hardly been on him. The others are still learning to accept him as an equal, once he's used to the power. Then we'll see. I won't call the Dai Kwo until we're certain."
He'll come next winter whether there's a boy ready or not.
"Perhaps. Or perhaps he'll die tonight. Or we will." No god made the world certain.
Tahi raised his hands in a pose of resignation.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?